Salam and peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laiq Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Welcome to episode 6, part 3. In part 1, we asked a strange, almost dangerous question. If reality had a code, the way books have alphabets and life has DNA, what would that even mean? We walked through letters and novels, notes and music, knots and rugs, 4 bases, and all of biology. And we ended with a quiet but very serious promise. In the Holophase view, we think the universe's code is written in phase and its derivatives. Now, before we touch derivatives, or anything that sounds like an equation, we need to do something very important. We need to fall in love with phase itself. We need to see what it is not, what makes it special, and why it is even plausible that everything could be written in it. In this part 3, we are going to do something that might feel familiar if you walked with me through episode 5. We are going to strip the world down to phase again. Some of what I say will echo earlier episodes. I ask your forgiveness in advance for any repetition. But this time, we are repeating for a very precise purpose. Not just to say phase is deep, but to see why phase is the right material to carry a universal code of existence. Think of it like returning to the same mountain from a new side. You have seen the slopes before, but this time we are climbing with a different goal: to reach the point where phase stops being just a helpful physics concept and starts being the actual fabric in which reality writes itself. Let's begin. I want you to imagine standing in the place you are right now. Maybe you are in a room, maybe on a train, maybe walking outside. In your mind's eye, look around. You see walls, objects, trees, people, screens, tables, the sky. Now we do a simple mental operation. We turn off all the names. There is no chair, no tree, no phone, no hand. Instead, there are just shapes and colors and textures. Already reality feels different. Now we go further. We turn off even these categories: solid, liquid, gas. We turn off this is my body and this is not my body. We allow everything to blur into a single flowing something with local variations. This is closer to how a small child or an animal or maybe a very old mystic sees the world. Not as a collection of separate things, but as a continuous field of experience with different flavors. Then we quieten our physics labels too. No more mass, no more force, no more energy, no more particle or wave, no more space and time as separate things in the mind. Everything we have been taught, every textbook, every diagram, we gently place on a shelf. We are not saying they are wrong. We are just turning the volume down. What is left? Not nothing. There is still structured change. There are patterns that hold together and other patterns that dissolve. There are rhythms and pulses, calm areas and busy areas. Something is clearly happening. But we resist the urge to immediately say, that is a photon, or that is a gravitational field, or that is kinetic energy. We just sit inside what is happening, and then we ask, if I wanted to describe all of this at the deepest possible level with one kind of quantity, one stuff that is present everywhere, what could that be? That question slowly leads us to phase. Let's give a very human definition of what phase is. Imagine a pendulum on a clock. It swings left, then right, then left again. Back and forth, back and forth. You can describe this swing by its position, by its speed, by the time it takes to complete a full swing. But there is another way. Imagine freezing the pendulum at some moment and asking, where in its cycle is it? Is it at the far left? Is it passing through the middle going right? Is it at the far right? You can represent this where in the cycle by an angle on a circle. 0 degrees at the middle going right, 90 degrees at the far right, 180 at the middle going left, 270 at the far left, and back to 360, which is the same as 0. That angle is what we call phase. Phase is where you are in a repeating cycle. You see the same idea everywhere. Think of the hands of a clock. At 3 o'clock, the minute hand is a quarter of the way around. That is a phase. Think of a sine wave drawn on paper. As you move along the horizontal axis, the height goes up and down. At each point, you can say what phase of the wave you are in. Crest, crossing, trough, crossing again. Think of a heartbeat. Each beat has a rise, a peak, and a fall. At any moment, your heart is at some phase of that repeating cycle. Phase is not how big something is. It is where you are in a rhythm. So far, that is just a way of describing cycles. But in the real world, phase is absolutely everywhere, quietly shaping what we experience. Consider sound. When you speak, or when I speak to you now in your ears, there is a sound wave. Tiny pressure variations in the air travel from my recorded voice to your eardrum. These variations repeat, faster for high notes, slower for low notes. At any point in the air, the pressure is going up and down like a wave. Phase tells you, at this particular point and this particular moment, where are we in the pressure cycle? If two sound waves of the same frequency meet, then if they are in phase, peaks lining up with peaks, troughs lining up with troughs, the sound becomes louder. If they are out of phase, peaks lining up with troughs, they can cancel each other. That is why noise-canceling headphones work. They generate a wave that is out of phase with the noise, so the two patterns cancel. Phase is the hidden structure that decides whether sound becomes stronger, weaker, or disappears. The same is true of light. Light is also a wave, not of air, but of electromagnetic fields. At any point in space, the electric field is oscillating, and the magnetic field is oscillating. Again, you can ask, where in its oscillation cycle is this light wave, at this point, at this time? That is its phase. Interference patterns, those stripes of bright and dark in famous physics experiments, are nothing but regions where light waves arrive in phase, bright, and regions where they arrive out of phase, dark. When we watch a laser interference pattern on a screen, what we are really seeing is phase made visible. Think of radio, Wi-Fi, your phone. When you use your phone, streams of information are being sent as radio waves. Modern communication systems do not just change amplitude, how strong a signal is, they also change phase. They use schemes where information is encoded by shifting the phase of a carrier wave. So when you scroll through messages, part of what you are seeing is text that was, moments ago, encoded in phase patterns of electromagnetic waves flying invisibly through the air. Even in quantum mechanics, where the details are more technical, phase plays a central role. The quantum state of a system is described by something like a wave, with an amplitude and a phase. There are famous thought experiments where only the phase changes, and yet the physical outcome changes dramatically. That is another hint. Phase is not just decoration. It is fundamental to how reality behaves. If you lay all of this together, you get a quiet but powerful picture. Sound, light, radio, Wi-Fi, quantum systems. At a deep level, all of them are playing with phase. Our best technologies, from wireless communication to lasers to quantum experiments, are already talking in phase. We rarely think of it that way. But if there were a hidden dial behind the world, changing phase in the right places would change a huge range of phenomena. Phase is not exotic. It is the water we are already swimming in. We usually only notice the waves, not the underlying angles. So far, we have talked about phase for one thing at a time. One pendulum, one sound wave, one light wave, one oscillator. But the universe does not run on a single isolated wave. It is full of waves, overlapping waves, oscillators interacting with oscillators, fields spread across space. To think about reality in terms of phase, we need one more step. Instead of having a separate phase for each object, we imagine a phase value at every point in space and time. This is what we mean by a phase field, or what we call in this project the holophase. You can imagine the holophase as a function that, at each position and time, gives you an angle. But don't worry about symbols. I want you to picture something more intuitive. Imagine that everywhere in space, in the air, in the walls, in your body, in the space between galaxies, there is an invisible forest of tiny little dials. Each dial can spin around in a full circle. Each dial always has some angle. There is not one dial per object. The dials are everywhere, continuously, forming a seamless sea. At any moment, the state of the universe, in this picture, is one gigantic pattern of angles, one huge continuous field of phase values. This is the holophase field. Holo means whole. Phase is the angle in the cycle. When we say holophase, we mean the global continuous phase field that lives under everything. You can think of it as the single rug underneath all the designs, or the single underlying song whose different parts we hear as different phenomena. Different regions of the universe correspond to different phase angles, and to different ways those angles vary and change. Now we can ask, what makes phase so special as a substrate? Why not say everything is energy and stop there? Why is phase even a serious candidate to carry a universal code? First, phase is cyclic, not linear. Ordinary numbers live on a line. You can count them up and you never come back. Phase lives on a circle. 0 degrees and 360 degrees are the same phase. 10 degrees and 370 degrees are the same. This cyclic nature makes phase naturally suited to rhythms and oscillations. It also allows a kind of counting. You can ask how many times phase winds around the loop, and that is an integer that cannot change without something dramatic happening, like creating or destroying a defect. That is the seed of quantization and topological structure. A universe whose fundamental quantity lives on a circle is better suited to describing waves, loops, and stable vortices than a universe whose fundamental quantity only lives on a line. Second, phase is relative, not absolute. You can never really measure the phase of everything. You can only measure differences. The phase between here and there, between this wave and that wave, between now and later. Physics cares about phase differences and phase gradients, not about an absolute value you could write on the whole universe. That means phase naturally encodes relationships: alignment, misalignment, delay, advance. Many of the things we care about in physics, forces, interactions, flows, are also about differences. Phase is a relational quantity by design. Third, phase is continuous but structured. It can vary smoothly from point to point, allowing smooth waves, delicate interference, and fine details. But because it wraps around, it also supports integer windings around loops. If you walk in a circle and track phase, you might find that it comes back shifted by one full turn, or 2 turns. Those windings can define robust, stable features in the phase field, phase vortices and knots that behave like long-lived objects. So phase supports both soft, flowing behavior and discrete, countable structure. That is very useful if you want a code that can produce both continuous fields and particle-like entities. Fourth, phase is naturally compatible with waves. Almost every major law of physics we know has wave-like solutions. Light, sound, matter waves, vibrations of solids, even gravitational waves, all have phases. So if you choose phase as your underlying variable, you're speaking the native language of many phenomena at once. It is like choosing a language that can talk to optics, acoustics, quantum mechanics, and communications without translation. For a universal code, that is a strong advantage. There is another requirement for a substrate of a code. We must be able to measure it, at least indirectly. DNA only became a powerful idea once we could actually read sequences and see how changes in the sequence change organisms. For phase, the same must be true. Otherwise, phase as substrate remains poetry, not physics. The truth is, we already measure phase all the time. Your ears are, in a sense, phase difference detectors. Sound reaches one ear slightly before the other, with slightly different phase. Your brain compares these signals and uses the differences to locate where a sound is coming from. If all sound waves reached both ears with exactly the same phase from every direction, your sense of spatial hearing would collapse. In optics, interferometers are devices built entirely to compare phases. They split light into two paths and then recombine it. If the phases line up, you see bright fringes. If they are opposite, you see dark fringes. Tiny changes in distance, in refractive index, even tiny ripples in spacetime as gravitational waves, all show up as changes in phase in interferometers. These machines are literally phase difference microscopes. In electronics, circuits called phase-locked loops lock on to the phase of signals and keep clocks synchronized. Your phone, your computer, your GPS, and many communication systems rely on deep control of phase to work at all. In holography and digital holography, we reconstruct not just intensity, but the phase of light across a surface. And from that, we can reconstruct three-dimensional information about objects. In all these ways, we are not just imagining phase. We are already reading and manipulating parts of the phase field of the world. All of this matters because it means the holophase picture is not asking you to believe in some invisible new mystical substance. It is pointing at a quantity we already control in the lab. The claim is not, here is a brand new mysterious field nobody has seen. The claim is, the thing you are already using in lasers, antennas, interferometers, holography, and quantum experiments is not just a helpful intermediate variable. It may be the real fabric underneath everything. Now we introduce one more concept that will matter later: coherence and the idea of licensed windows. Imagine two extremes. In one, phase is perfectly coherent. Like soldiers marching in step, every oscillation is in a fixed relationship with its neighbors. In the other, phase is completely random, like a huge crowd where everyone is dancing to their own beat. In a region where phase is coherent, waves can interfere strongly. Patterns can be stable, and we can reliably measure phase differences. In a region where phase is random, interference averages out, and nothing holds together very long. It becomes hard to extract meaningful structure. In the Holophase framework, a licensed window is a finite region of space and time where the phase field is coherent enough and our instruments are good enough that we can reconstruct phase and its changes with well-controlled uncertainty. The idea is simple. We only make strong onti-claims, claims about what really exists, inside windows where phase is readable and reconstructible. Outside those windows, we stay cautious. Think of trying to see a mountain. On a clear day, you see its edges and can draw a good map. In thick fog, you know the mountain is there, but you cannot see enough to map it. Licensed windows are like clear patches in the fog of phase, areas where the pattern is sharp enough for us to talk honestly about what phi is doing. At this point, you might ask, why not just stick with energy or particles as our foundation? Why go through all this? Energy is incredibly useful, but it is a tally, not a detailed description. Many very different configurations can have the same total energy. That is like two books having the same number of letters, but telling completely different stories. Energy tells you how much activity you have. It does not tell you the detailed pattern. Likewise, the familiar picture of particles in spacetime is powerful, but behaves more like a story drawn on a stage than like the code that writes the whole play. In that picture, you start with a background spacetime, then sprinkle particles into it, then add forces and fields to govern them. A universal code would go deeper. It would derive the stage and the characters and the rules from a single substrate. Phase, as a continuous field, has a chance of doing that. Its propagation rules can give rise to effective geometries, what we perceive as spacetime structure, and its topological windings can give rise to stable, particle-like objects. Its activity tallies can map to energy-like quantities. Its gradients can look like forces. Its patterns can carry information. Again, in this part, we are not proving all of that. We are simply motivating why phase is a natural candidate. So the holophase picture is this. Imagine a single continuous phase field, the holophase, defined wherever we are allowed to talk. This field has a value, an angle, at every point, and that value varies from place to place and time to time. Where the world seems calm, phase varies slowly. Where the world is active and intense, phase may be twisting rapidly, forming gradients, waves, and vortices. From the holophase perspective, this field is the actual substrate of what exists. Not a substance in the old sense of a fluid or a gas, but the underlying variable from which everything else is derived. A tree, your body, a ray of light, an atom, a galaxy, all can be seen as stable, structured patterns in this one phase field. In the same way that a melody is a pattern in air pressure, a rug design is a pattern of knots, and a story is a pattern of letters, the things we call objects and fields would be patterns in phase. The stuff is phase. The code is how phase changes and combines. To make this sharper, imagine one more thought experiment. Imagine your senses are altered so that you no longer see color and shape, no longer feel solids and liquids, no longer hear ordinary sound. Instead, you can directly perceive the phase field. You look around and you see a shifting ocean of angles, or a swirling canvas of hues where hue represents phase. What used to be a tree now appears as a stable, branching pattern in that field, holding its structure over time. Your hand appears as a coordinated cluster of phase patterns that move and flex together, but maintain identity as you wave it. What used to be music appears as traveling waves and interference patterns in phase. A star appears as a dense, active knot of phase activity, radiating structured waves outward. In this imaginary world, nothing exists apart from the phase field and its changing pattern. There are no separate objects floating in a void. There is only one continuous field, organized in endlessly varied ways. That is the holophase universe. Of course, in our actual lives, we do not see phase directly like this. We infer it indirectly through instruments and effects. But this exercise shows that there is a coherent way to redescribe everything we know in terms of one continuous field of phase. That is exactly the move the holophase model proposes. Let's gather where we are at the end of part 3. We began by turning off labels to see if we could imagine one common stuff underneath everything. We reintroduced phase as where you are in a cycle, and we saw it in pendulums, sound, light, radio, and quantum systems. We extended that idea to a phase field, the holophase, a phase value at every point in space and time, like a universe-wide sea of tiny spinning dials. We listed properties that make phase a special candidate substrate. It is cyclic, relational, continuous yet capable of discrete windings, native to waves, and already central in our instruments and technologies. We distinguished maps from codes. Maps describe what is there. Codes generate what can be there. We noted that energy is more like a tally than a code, and particles in spacetime are more like drawings on a stage than the program that writes the stage itself. We suggested that phase is a stronger candidate for the substrate on which a universal code can be written because it is continuous, relational, wave-friendly, measurable, and generative. We also introduced coherence and licensed windows as a way to stay honest about where we can truly read the phase field and where we cannot. And we imagined the world seen only in phase, where everything familiar becomes a pattern in one continuous field. We have not yet written down the code of existence. We have only chosen the material the code will be written in. In the rest of episode 6, we will do something more daring. We will stop looking only at phase itself and start looking at how phase changes. Because the real letters of the code of existence are not just the phase values here and now, but the way phase varies, how it ticks in time, how it twists in space, how those variations lock together into motion, and how higher order changes produce curvature, acceleration, and structure. Those changes, the derivatives of phase, will turn out to be the first line of the universe's alphabet: time, space, and motion as phase readouts. That is the work of the next part. For now, I invite you to let this sink in. Underneath all the furniture of your life, objects, forces, even energy, there may be a single, quiet, continuous field of phase. And we may already be holding, in our laboratories and in our equations, the very thing reality uses as its canvas. In part 4, we will take our first step from phase as substrate to phase as code by asking the simplest possible question. If the holophase is the universal rhythm, what happens when it changes?